Nowadays, our whole world is filled with social media. Do you ever just hop on Twitter and see these tweets? They're so common these days that we just overlook them. But if you really look into the meaning of these, what do they really mean? I'm afraid of this, I'm afraid of that. But how do we as humans really overcome fear? The answer is, we really don't. We tend to do things that keep us from things we're scared of, or not do things because we're scared of something. This is something called fear-initiated action. There are two methods that our body do this. One is physically, and the other is psychologically/emotionally. One of the ways are denial. This is an emotional effect linked to a physical effect. Denial is a form of avoidance which is triggered by our brain's fight or flight instinct. It is the first things we as humans do when confronted with a problem. We think to ourselves, why solve the problem when you can just avoid the problem? We then try to deny and avoid what really happened and think of those thoughts that keep us in our comfort zone. An example of denial is refusing to accept one's identity. The character Garnet in the book Keeper and Me by Richard Wagamese constantly lied to other people about his race. He refused to tell others that he was Aboriginal. This is caused by fear. Garnet was afraid of the consequences that would follow if he told others his true identity. He was afraid to be neglected, abused, or treated differently if others knew about his race. So he decided to deny it, a natural instinct of us humans. Another way that we do this is physically. The fight or flight response is a reaction that occurs in response to a perceived harmful event, attack, or threat to survival. When a fight or flight response is activated, sequences of nerve cell firing and chemicals such as adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol are released into a bloodstream. These patterns of nerve cell firing causes our body to go through a series of dramatic changes. Our breathing rate increases, our pupils dilate, our pulse rate increases, our eyes sharpen, and our mind becomes much faster and ready to fight or flight. Garnet experiences a very similar version of this fight or flight syndrome when he has to choose between staying at his reserve and accepting his true identity, which is fighting, or leaving his reserve and living his life as a non-Indian, which is flight. Another example of fear-initiated action is what the girl Shishi Etko did in the book Miss Ferreira read us. She was afraid of losing her family and identity and culture, so before she left, she tries to gather as much memories as possible in fear of that. In the same way that Garnet lied about his identity due to fear, this is something called fear-initiated action. How do we overcome fear as humans? I think that's a question wrongly worded. We should rather ask, how do we use fear for a better future? Native Indians had to be pretty fearless people for surviving in a land of wilderness for over thousands of years. Look at this picture of Ojibwe art. It shows how much they actually represented their own culture. Now you take the children of those brave people, shove them in a school, and force them to forget their own culture for their entire childhood. You're going to be left with young adults who are afraid to admit who they are and realize their real identity. Just like Garnet and how he wouldn't admit he was Indian, whenever he was asked who he was, he'd always create a fake identity. Wab Kinew, an ambassador for Native people, describes the lives of these kids perfectly.
Are the children of residential schools simply called former students? Well, no. Wab insisted they're survivors. For Wab, that fight was close to home because his father, like more than 100,000 Native children, went to a residential school where he was brutalized and terrorized. To Wab, his father wasn't merely a former student. He was a survivor.
Wab Kinew also talks about the problem in the relationship between Aboriginals and the Canadian government.
What do you think the conversation that people are having about scrapping of what's been called the Indian Act?
I say get rid of the Indian Act entirely. I mean, the idea that, first of all, anywhere in the world, when you take one group of people and you put them off aside from the rest, that never works. It never seems to work anywhere in the world. So I don't know why we expect that it's still going to work in Canada to this day. I know there's a lot of fear about what would come after the Indian Act. A lot of chiefs are afraid, what's going to happen to our funding, what's going to happen to our rights as they're currently recognized. I say don't be afraid. You know, the only thing we have to lose is our status cards.
Getting rid of reserves can help places like White Dog develop. They'd give them a proper education system and give the kids of reserves, like White Dog, a chance to have a proper education. But first there has to be a stop to abuse to Aboriginal women and the stereotypes they face, like this case in Thunder Bay, Ontario, where a woman still doesn't trust the RCMP. She's been living there for over 36 years. Canada isn't the type of place where someone should be scared of their own police force for racial profiling. Fear can be and should be looked at as a warning, a projection of a bad possibility in the future. Many of the decisions we take in our life are strictly based off our fears. If we take those same fears, analyze them for a moment, we can find out who we really are. In this interview with Mr. Fajiki, we ask him about his fears and how he overcomes them.
What is your biggest fear in life, and how do you plan to overcome it?
Right now, I think natural disasters. Because I'm from Japan,
Yeah.
and the country is very prone to earthquakes and tsunami. And I work for a Japanese company, so and if something really serious happened, especially to Tokyo, you know, my financial basis will be lost. It's the largest fear.
And how do you plan to overcome your fear?
Right now, I'm trying to save as much money as I can for the future uncertainty.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So how do we overcome fear as humans? We don't. We use fear to predict what can go wrong if our worst fears came true. And that's the same way fear-initiated actions control us humans. We based every decision in our lives off of fear, and I think we should use fear as something on our side rather than something that we oppose.